In the chilly dawn of November 5th, 1872, the Mary Celeste, a sturdy 282-ton brigantine built in Nova Scotia, Canada, prepared to set sail from New York Harbor. She was commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs, a respected and deeply religious seaman known for his discipline and steady leadership. The ship carried a cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, bound for Genoa, Italy, a common but valuable shipment at the time. On board were 7 experienced crewmen, the captain's wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. It was meant to be a profitable and straightforward voyage across the Atlantic, yet what followed would become one of the greatest maritime mysteries in recorded history. The Mary Celeste had already lived a turbulent life. Originally launched in 1861 as the Amazon, she endured several accidents, collisions, and even a fire before being sold to a consortium of American owners who refitted her and renamed her. Sailors whispered that she was cursed, though Briggs himself was not a superstitious man. On that crisp November morning, the family and crew loaded their supplies, plenty of food, water, and navigational instruments, anticipating a journey of about 6 to 8 weeks. Briggs wrote to his mother, assuring her that our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a prosperous voyage. For nearly a month after leaving port, nothing seemed amiss. The Mary Celeste was last seen by another ship, the Del Gratia, on November 25th near the Azores Islands in the mid-Atlantic. Captain David Morehouse of the Del Gratia had known Briggs personally and was surprised to see his friend's vessel drifting erratically, her sails partially set, but flapping loose in the wind. There was no response to repeated signals. On December 5th, 1872, the Del Gratia finally caught up to the Mary Celeste. A boarding party was sent to investigate what appeared to be an abandoned ship moving quietly over calm waters. When they climbed aboard, the scene was unsettling. The ship was completely deserted. There were no signs of struggle or violence. The cargo hold was intact, almost all barrels accounted for, and the crew's personal belongings remained neatly stored. The galley was in order, and food had been recently prepared. A sewing machine sat on a table, a child's toy lay nearby, and Captain Briggs's logbook ended abruptly on November 25th, with a final entry noting fair weather. The ship's single lifeboat, however, was missing. The condition of the Mary Celeste added to the confusion. The hatches were open, and the cabin was damp, but not flooded. The ship had taken on a little water, but was entirely seaworthy. The compass was smashed, and one of the pumps was disassembled, suggesting possible attempts to address a leak. Yet the chronometer and sextant, vital navigation tools, were gone, implying the crew may have left intentionally. Still, why abandon a stable vessel in the middle of the ocean? Captain Morehouse ordered his men to sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where the British Admiralty could conduct a full investigation. It took them nearly 2 weeks to bring the ship to port, battling rough weather and eerie silence from a ship that now felt like a floating ghost. On December 13th, the vessel arrived in Gibraltar, where officials began one of the most perplexing inquiries in maritime law. Surveyors examined the hull for damage, looking for clues that could explain why everyone had vanished. They found deep scratches on the bow, as if from rough seas or a collision, but no structural damage severe enough to warrant evacuation. The cargo was mostly untouched, though 9 barrels were found empty, made of red oak rather than white oak, more porous and likely to leak alcohol vapors. This detail would later become the heart of one of the most plausible theories. The first suspicion fell upon Captain Morehouse and his crew. Some officials suggested they had murdered the crew of the Mary Celeste to claim salvage rights. After all, the vessel was worth a fortune, and the Del Gratia's crew stood to gain a large payout if they brought her safely to port. But the evidence did not fit. There were no signs of violence, no blood, and no missing valuables. Morehouse's log entries matched the timeline perfectly, and his reputation as a disciplined, honest captain made the theory unlikely. As the legal hearings dragged on, public fascination exploded. Newspapers dubbed it the ghost ship of the Atlantic. Speculation ran wild. Mutiny, piracy, sea monsters, even supernatural curses. Yet the facts remained stubbornly mundane yet chilling. A sound vessel, a vanished crew, and no conclusive answers. One of the first rational explanations came from nautical experts who suggested a natural disaster. Could a sudden waterspout or rogue wave have swept the crew overboard? Perhaps they mistook the minor flooding for a fatal leak and fled in panic. The trouble with this theory is that the Mary Celeste showed no signs of catastrophic damage, and the weather around the Azores had been calm during that period. Another idea centered on the ship's cargo, the 1,701 barrels of alcohol. If some had leaked, the fumes could have built up in the hold, creating a terrifying situation. A single spark might have triggered an explosion, but since the ship didn't show signs of fire, theorists proposed that a flash explosion could have occurred, blowing open hatches without scorching anything. Captain Briggs, fearing the ship might catch fire, could have ordered everyone into the lifeboat temporarily, tethered to the vessel by a rope. A gust of wind or a sudden swell might have snapped the line, setting them adrift forever while the Mary Celeste sailed on, empty but intact. Despite such reasoning, the British Admiralty was not convinced. In February 1873, after extensive hearings, the court officially cleared Captain Morehouse of wrongdoing and awarded him a modest salvage payment, far less than expected, reflecting the lingering suspicion that something untoward had happened. The Mary Celeste herself was repaired and returned to service, though sailors avoided her. Many believe she was cursed, and her subsequent career did little to dispel that fear. Over the following years, the Mary Celeste changed ownership multiple times, each captain seemingly plagued by misfortune. In 1873, she was sold to a series of new investors who hoped to erase her dark reputation, but word of her eerie past followed wherever she went. Sailors whispered that strange sounds echoed in her hull at night, and that compasses spun erratically when she was at sea. Some refused to set foot aboard, calling her the cursed brigantine. Her voyages after the disappearance were marred by accidents and poor luck. In one instance, a captain reported that his first mate vanished without a trace during calm weather. Another claimed that tools and ropes would move by themselves, as if manipulated by unseen hands. Whether these accounts were true or born from fear, they cemented the ship's reputation as haunted. By the 1880s, the Mary Celeste was struggling to find steady work, and her value dropped significantly. In 1884, the ship was purchased by a man named Captain G.C. Parker, who used her for trading missions in the Caribbean. Desperate for profit, Parker overinsured her and loaded the vessel with worthless cargo, intending to scuttle her for the insurance money. On January 3, 1885, he deliberately wrecked the Mary Celeste off the coast of Haiti, hoping to make it look accidental. But investigators quickly discovered the deception, and Parker was tried and convicted for fraud. Ironically, the cursed ship ended her 24-year career in scandal and destruction, the mystery of her vanished crew still unsolved. Even as she sank beneath the waves, the legend of the Mary Celeste only grew stronger. Writers, historians, and spiritualists all tried to interpret what happened. In 1884, British author Arthur Conan Doyle, before creating Sherlock Holmes, published a short story titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, inspired by the mystery. Though fictional, it reignited public obsession and added new layers of superstition. Doyle's story portrayed the disappearance as part of a sinister racial and mystical conspiracy, feeding into Victorian-era fascination with the unknown. Over the next century, researchers and scientists revisited the case repeatedly. In the early 20th century, maritime historians combed through logs and weather records, seeking to understand the final days of November 1872. Meteorological data confirmed that the Atlantic was calm and stable near the Azores, making storms unlikely. Meanwhile, Modern chemists examined the alcohol leak theory more closely, demonstrating that vapor buildup could indeed cause a loud explosive burst of pressure, enough to terrify but not destroy. Forensic analysts studying the ship's official survey records from Gibraltar also noticed something intriguing. Faint marks of scorching near one of the hatches, possibly evidence of a brief combustion event. This gave strong support to the flash explosion hypothesis. If true, it would mean Captain Briggs made a rational, though tragic, decision, evacuating temporarily to avoid fire, unaware that fate would sever his only lifeline back to safety. But the mystery deepened again in 2007, when a group of marine archaeologists examined documents and recovered artifacts believed to belong to the Mary Celeste's later wreck near Haiti. Using carbon dating and chemical tests, they confirmed the ship's identity, but not her secrets. No personal belongings, no bones, no remains of the original crew were ever found. Some scholars still wonder whether human conflict could explain it all. The ship's manifest listed a multinational crew, including men from Germany and Scandinavia. Perhaps tensions rose during the voyage. Mutiny, alcohol, or fear could have driven chaos. Yet no traces of violence were ever discovered. No blood, no broken weapons, no theft. Even the valuables, Captain Briggs's chronometer, papers, and family possessions, were left untouched. Other theories venture into the paranormal. Throughout the 19th century, spiritualism was booming in both Europe and America, and many citizens believed that the Mary Celeste's fate was divine punishment, or perhaps intervention from beyond. Some claimed her crew was abducted by a sea creature, others that they were taken by aliens or transported through a rift in time. Such ideas, while sensational, reflect the enduring human need to explain what logic cannot. In the end, the story of the Mary Celeste became more than a maritime mystery. It became a mirror reflecting human fear and imagination. Every attempt to solve it seemed to raise new questions. Why did they leave a seaworthy vessel? Why was no trace ever found? What happened to the lifeboat? And why did no other ship report survivors or wreckage? Today, the Mary Celeste remains an enduring symbol of the unknown. Her story has been adapted into countless documentaries, novels, and investigations, each one circling the same unanswered question. What really happened in those final hours of November 1872? Oceanographers continue to study her last recorded route, tracing currents and winds to determine where a drifting lifeboat might have gone. Computer simulations suggest that if the crew abandoned ship around the Azores, the small craft could have drifted hundreds of miles before sinking, leaving no trace. To this day, the final log entry of Captain Briggs remains one of the most haunting records in maritime history. Soundings taken. Depth, 120 fathoms. Cloudy weather. Wind steady from the north. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing hinted at panic. Yet within hours, every soul aboard vanished into eternity. The sea has kept her secret for over 150 years, and perhaps it always will. The Mary Celeste, silent and forsaken, drifts not through the waves anymore, but through time, forever sailing in the imagination of those who hear her name and wonder what truth lies beneath the endless blue horizon. As the decades passed, the Mary Celeste transformed from a maritime case file into a cultural legend. By the early 1900s, her name had become synonymous with ghost ships and the mysterious forces of the sea. Every few years, new reports surfaced of sailors claiming to see her spectral form, drifting silently in fog banks off the North Atlantic, her sails full, but her decks empty. These ghostly sightings were likely illusions born from fear and superstition, but they added fuel to the legend. In 1924, the British magazine The Strand published an extensive feature revisiting the Mary Celeste case, interviewing descendants of Captain Briggs and crew members of the Del Gratia. The article reintroduced the story to a new generation fascinated by mystery and adventure. It emphasized how perfectly ordinary the circumstances had seemed before the disappearance.
Captain Briggs was no reckless man. He was disciplined, sober, and deeply religious. His wife, Sarah, kept a journal recording her faith and devotion. Their inclusion of their small daughter, Sophia, aboard the ship symbolized their trust in the voyage's safety. Nothing in their behavior suggested fear, discontent, or desperation. A historian named Howard Lincoln, writing in the 1930s, proposed a new theory. He believed that a sudden seaquake, an underwater earthquake, might have destabilized the ship, releasing methane gas from the ocean floor. This could explain both the flooding found on board and the potential for toxic fumes that might have driven the crew above deck in panic. However, modern research later revealed no evidence of seismic activity in the Azores region during that period. Throughout the 20th century, the story appeared in radio shows, pulp magazines, and eventually television. In the 1950s, American broadcaster Orson Welles included the Mary Celeste in one of his famous dramatic readings, presenting it as an example of the eternal enigma of the sea. Later, in 1956, Hollywood released The Mystery of the Mary Celeste, a black-and-white thriller starring Hammer Films' young actor Bela Lugosi. Though it twisted facts for drama, the movie cemented the legend in popular imagination, a ghost ship cursed by its own secrets. By the 1970s, oceanic research had advanced enough for scientists to examine the plausibility of the gas explosion hypothesis in more detail. Chemists at the University of London conducted controlled experiments to replicate what might have happened
inside the ship's hold. They mixed alcohol fumes with air and ignited them in a confined space. The results supported a frightening scenario: an explosion powerful enough to blow open hatches, but not cause lasting fire damage. It was, finally, a scientific basis for the mysterious evidence found in 1872: the opened hatches, the missing lifeboat, the intact hull. Still, mysteries persisted. Why did Captain Briggs, an experienced mariner, take his entire family on a cargo voyage? Many merchant captains of the era traveled alone, seeing the Atlantic as too dangerous for loved ones. Historians found letters suggesting that Briggs wanted to transition away from commercial shipping to a more stable career once he returned from Genoa. This voyage, according to his correspondence, was meant to be his final great commission. The tragic irony of that statement only deepens the melancholy of his disappearance. In the 1990s, maritime historians revisited the original Gibraltar investigation documents, many of which had been forgotten in archives for over a century. Among the recovered records was a small but revealing testimony. One of the inspectors mentioned the presence of a peculiar odor in the hold, resembling fermented spirits. This overlooked note added weight to the alcohol leak theory. Yet by then, the case had become so mythologized that no single explanation could satisfy everyone. Modern-day expeditions have even tried to locate the remains of the Mary Celeste's final wreck off Haiti's northwestern coast. In 2001, a team led by marine archaeologist Clive Cussler, yes, the adventure novelist himself, announced they had found the ship's remains. The hull fragments matched the brigantine's known dimensions, and timber samples were dated to the correct era. However, later analysis by the Smithsonian Institution determined that while the wreck was of the right age, it did not conclusively match the Mary Celeste's specific construction details. The sea, as always, keeps its secrets well. Today, historians view the Mary Celeste as a lesson in how mystery transforms over time. What began as a maritime disappearance evolved into a story about human psychology, how uncertainty invites imagination. The ship's fate may be simple: a small leak, a cloud of fumes, a tragic misjudgment. But its legend persists because humans crave stories that cannot be neatly solved. The unknown gives meaning to the ordinary, and the Mary Celeste remains forever caught between truth and myth. Even now, on stormy nights in the Atlantic, sailors tell tales of a pale brigantine glimpsed through the fog, her sails billowing, her wheel turning slowly, though no hand guides it. They say that if you call out to her, The wind carries your voice back hollow and empty, as though the sea itself is answering. Some insist they've seen a woman standing at the rail, a child in her arms, watching silently as the ship fades into mist. Whether ghost, warning, or coincidence, the Mary Celeste remains an enduring riddle of the deep. More than a century and a half later, her story continues to echo, a haunting reminder that even in an age of science and certainty, there are still places where logic falters and mystery reigns.